Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Bass Tales. Been a little bit, been kind of busy here, haven't been able to record an episode, but I thought today was a great day to do a quick recording about talking about different trout species. We're into the springtime now, finally getting over that cold weather. The ice has melted in the ponds around here. They have done their first stocking. I actually got out the other day and hooked up with a trout, ended up losing it before I got it in. It shook off. Wished I landed it, that didn't happen. And I was like, you know what? Today is a good day to talk about trout. We're not going to talk about all the species because in the world there's 25 trout species. There's 11 in North America. I'm going to stick to basically the most common and the 4 species that are stocked in Massachusetts. And the one I know the most about basically is the eastern brook trout, the brown, the tiger, and the rainbow. And trout are known as a great eating fish. It was probably the most popular freshwater game fish until about the 1950s and the 1960s, where the bass, the largemouth bass, ended up taking over as the number one game fish. But before that, I would say that the trout was the number one game fish in America. And right now, holding that number 2 spot probably pretty strongly is the number 2 freshwater fish. And we're going to talk about the native area for each trout and locations that they are now and how they got there. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to start with our number 1 fish, which is the brook trout. It's the only one that's actually native to the Massachusetts area. I figured that's a good one to start with. And basically their native range was from eastern North America, like the Appalachian Mountain area. They like that cool, elevated area, high oxygen water, and they like that moving streams. I think northern Georgia, like up into Canada, along that Appalachian Mountain Trail. But now they've stocked in the western part of the U.S. You can find them in Europe, Argentina, and New Zealand. The brown trout is native to Europe, West Asia, and parts of the Middle East, and even the part of North Africa. It wasn't stocked in the U.S. until 1883, and it was by a guy named Fred Mather. He was a New York fish farmer and an angler, and he had the authority under the U.S. Fish Commissioner, Spencer Beard, to do that. Spencer Beard, I also believe, started the first government-sponsored hatchery, I believe, as well. And what they did is they obtained brown trout eggs from Germany, and then later, about 2 years later, they started receiving eggs from Lochleven, Scotland, and different parts of England as well. And in April of 1884, they released 4,900 brown trout into the Baldwin River in Michigan, and that started the process of stocking browns into native areas of brook trout. And that's what goes on to our next fish, is the tiger trout. And how that came about was it's actually an intergenetic hybrid of a male brook trout and a female brown trout. And they would have never existed if that stocking never happened. Interesting how some things happen, but that's how you have a tiger trout. They were first discovered in the wild in 1944, and in the wild only about 5% survive out of the eggs. Started making them in hatcheries, they got that up to about 85% survival rate. And what they do is they use a heat shock to the fertilized eggs, and I guess it creates an extra set of chromosomes. Trust me, I have no idea. I am not a chemist or a biologist, so I don't know exactly what it does, but it increases that survival rate from 5% to 85%. Now we have what is known as the tiger trout, and they are getting very more popular with fishing, and now there are 13 states that actually stock tiger trouts, and they're a very interesting fish, and we'll get more into them in a little bit, and you'll know why. And last but not least, probably our most common fish that most of us know about is the rainbow. And it's native to the western part of North America, from like northern Mexico through Canada up to Alaska. It's probably the most stocked fish worldwide, and it's on every continent except Antarctica. And an interesting fact that 60% of all the stocked fish in Massachusetts, 60% of them are rainbow trout. So you can see how popular they are as a stocked fish. Next, we're going to talk a little about their sizes that you can expect when you catch a fish and their lifespan, and we'll talk about the records as well. And the brook trout, you can expect them to be about 9 to 10 inches, 1 to 5 pounds in streams. If they're in a larger lake or a good location where they can get bigger, or a larger river, they can grow up to 20 inches and 10 pounds. If they're a wild trout and not a stock trout, they're often smaller than 8 inches, where a stock trout that's installed into a waterway is usually 9 to 18 inches. You're catching wild trout. I haven't actually caught any wild ones. I mostly caught stock trout because where I am is near the ocean. I'm not near these waterways out by the mountains where you can catch the wild ones. But people that are big trout anglers, they know the difference between the wild trout and the stock trout. And there's controversy about, introducing stock trout into wild trout, and obviously different species in the waterways the native fish were in the wild ones. So we're not going to get too much into that. And the world record was caught in 1915 in Ontario, Canada. Brook trout was 14 pounds, 8 ounces, and the length was over 31 inches. Average age of a brook trout is about 2 to 3 years, or average lifespan, I should say, is about 2 to 3 years. But they can live up to 6 years. That's where you're going to get some of those bigger ones. And the brown trout, they're about 14 to 20 inches long. Again, about that 1 to 5 pound range average. But they can, in the correct waterway where they have a good abundance of food and a bigger water area, they can get up to 39 inches and over 20 pounds. The world record was in New Zealand that was caught in 2020, and it was 44 pounds, 5 ounces, and it was over 38 inches long. The average lifespan was about 5 to 6 years with a brown trout. But they can also live 10, or even there have been recorded instances of them reaching 20 years of age. So they can live a lot longer than the brook trout. And again, we're talking about the tiger trout. They can go 10 to 16 inches, again, about that 1 to 5 pound range. So you can see these trout are all about that 1 to 5 pound range, about the same length for a lot of them. So that's why you can catch them on lighter gear and they're easier to catch. But the amazing thing is they can, in the right conditions, all these trout can grow to enormous sizes. And again, a tiger trout, they can grow over 20 inches and over 5 pounds, just like the other fish we're talking about, in the right conditions. And the world record was caught on Loon Lake in Washington State in 2022. And it was an amazing 27 pounds and 6 ounces, and it was over 35 inches long. And the average age is about 6 to 7 years on a tiger trout. They seem that they could live a little longer than that, but I don't think they live as long as some of the other fish. They have a shorter lifespan, being that intergenetic fish. I think they have a better average living time, but they can't get, living up to like 20 years like some of these brown trouts have. Last but not least, again, is the rainbow. Its average length is about 12 to 20 inches. Their weight's about 1 to 4 pounds. Again, they can grow up to about 20 inches and over 8 pounds in the correct waters, so you can get some bigger ones. The world record was caught in 2009 in Saskatchewan, Canada, and this fish was amazing. It was 48 pounds and over 42 inches long. And it's a very interesting story that I'm saving for the end about that record. It had some controversy about it, so we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast today. The average age for a rainbow is about 3 to 4 years, but there was a max recorded, that one that was caught. I don't know how they know, maybe genetic testing or something, that they have caught one that was 11 years old at one point. And next, let's talk about the visual differences of these trout. So if you catch one, you'll know which one you caught, because they all look kind of similar, but there's a few visual keys to look for so you can tell them apart pretty easily. So the brook trout have like a worm-like markings along their backs. They also have yellow and red spots with blue halos around them, and the spots are lighter than their bodies, which is different than the brown trout, which they're almost like a golden to a brownish colored yellow spots with silver halos, and their spots will be darker than their bodies. And the tiger trouts, they have those worm-like markings like their father, like the brook trout, but they're all over their bodies, and they have no spots. And those worm-like spots all over their bodies give them those stripes that kind of look like a tiger, so I think that's where they get their name from. And last but not least is probably the rainbow trout, which is the easiest. Most people recognize those, but they have like that like reddish to pinkish stripe that runs down their body. That's the easiest way to tell them apart. Now let's talk about the behaviors. This will also lead to some tactics and what to try to catch them by different species. They all eat the same things, pretty much anything, similar to like a lot of other fish. They'll go after bait fish, they'll go after insects, they'll go after crayfish, amphibians like frogs and stuff like that. So they're all pretty much go after anything, but they prefer different foods, and that's a good way to look at it when you're trying to go and catch them. And if you're looking for brook trout, they're basically prefer like a moving water situation. In the wild, they're in these smaller streams, and a lot of times you'll catch them in like the shaded area under trees. If you're in an area where they're stocked, look for a water inflow area. You might have a better chance of catching a brook trout if you're trying to catch one where there is some water that's got a little movement coming in. And a good thing to try for them, they prefer eating bugs. So if you're into fly fishing, that's probably a good fish to go after with flies, because they do like they eat the bugs off the surface. But another good lure is definitely an inline spinner. That's a great lure to use in any type of current. It'll work with other fish too, just like the flies. But I think if you're going to go after brook, those are two good spots to check out first. Is try some fly fishing or inline spinners. Those would be my two go-tos to start with. The brown trout is the most difficult to catch. They get easily spooked. They're very difficult to fool with lures, and they prefer eating bait fish. Your best tactic's probably going with like a live shiner or live bait to catch them. But if you're going to go with lures, stick to something like a minnow plug. You know, you could go with like a Rapala, like floating minnow, or like a jerk bait, or some smaller crankbaits. You could also try some spoons. But the problem is they're very inactive during the day, and they'll stick to like deeper water, and they'll always stay near like cover, like a rock or a tree stump, and they don't really move around much like other trout. So they'll just kind of stick out there during the day. Your best bet to catch them is you're going to kind of have to wait till like low light situations, like early morning or late evening, or even night fishing. That's your best bet on catching a good brown trout. Now, the tiger trout, which we talked about before, is basically kind of takes from both parents. It can live in more areas than like the brook and the brown that prefer like different type of situations. And they don't spook easy like the brown or the brook that's a little more spooked. The tiger is a very aggressive fish, and they put up a great fight. They like throwing their body weight around. They kind of have a heavier thickness to them, and they really like to use that when they get hooked up. And they're a sought after fish too, because you can't catch them everywhere, and there's not a lot of them, not like rainbows, brooks, or browns. So a lot of anglers would like sought after catching these guys. In Massachusetts, they only stock 2,500 a year out of 500,000. And they have 5 hatcheries in Massachusetts, and only one actually stocks tiger trouts. An interesting story I heard about. This is how aggressive these tiger trouts are. I once heard about a story about an angler, and he was fly fishing, and he was in waders out in the water, and he hooked up with like a nice, 1-2 pound rainbow, and he was reeling it in, and out of nowhere, and he could see it because it was clear water, this tiger trout that was around like 4 pounds came up and started biting at the rainbow that it saw, that probably thought it was in distress or dying because of the movement, because it was hooked up, and just kept biting at it and trying to eat it while the angler reeled up the fish. And basically it gets like a tunnel vision. It's so crazy with these tiger trout, and that's how aggressive they are. And the angler couldn't even scare the tiger trout off until it was right up next to the angler. He probably almost could have caught that tiger trout if he reached his hands in the water. He was so close to it. And I had a situation too, when they're active and they're nearby. There was schooling tiger trout one day, and I'm just happened to be fishing this area, and I ended up in 15 minutes catching 5 of them. So they're very easy to catch too, which because of their aggressive nature, and they're just fun to catch, and there's not many of them. So it's a great fish to go after if you know when they're stalking them or where, and you'll enjoy catching them for sure. And for lures, I would go after them basically the same as the brown trout. They prefer eating fish more than like bugs and stuff like that. Like the brook trout, they're more like their mother, the brown trout, where they prefer like going after bait fish. So you could try the minnow plugs or spoons or live shiners. That would be your best bet with the tiger trout over going with like flies or inline. Well, inline spinner would probably work too, but that's what I'd probably try if you're going after tigers. And last but not least, our favorite fish for most is the rainbow. And people love rainbow trout, and the reason they fight hard and they can basically put on a show sometimes leaping out of the water when you catch them. And they're one of the easiest fish to catch. They basically will strike almost any bait and most lures. You could fly fish for them. You could use basically any type of lure for trout. You can go with the spinner, the spoon, the crankbait. You can catch them on little like grubs, soft plastics. They basically go after everything. That's the good thing about rainbows. They're not hard to catch. They are a pretty aggressive fish, and they don't get spooked as much as the brook or the brown. Not quite as aggressive as the tiger trout, obviously, but they're up there, and that's why they're one of the top game fish. I would say they're in the top 5 game fish in the U.S. and probably the world. And a good thing after they stock them, and I've talked about this before, is trying like power bait. They're very easy to catch on power bait, and if you want to catch some, that would be my number one guess with the rainbow, is to go out there with the power bait and give that a try right after they stocked them. And it works even further than that, but I prefer like throwing lures and having fun that way. But if you're bringing out a small child or just want to catch one, haven't caught one before, go with the power bait right after they stocked them. You'll definitely catch some. So now let's talk about that world record rainbow trout, the story behind that, and that amazing 48-pound fish. It was caught in September of 2009 in Lake Diefenberger by an angler named Sean Conrad. But this is where the story gets a little interesting. Sean actually broke his identical twin brother Adam's record. And Adam had the record from 2 years prior, and his rainbow was 43.6 pounds. And between the two of them, they hold 5 IGFA line class records in addition to their world records. And they have said that they have caught more than 300 fish over 20 pounds and several over 30 pounds. They would only go out at night to fish because they started getting people following them around, trying to keep their fishing areas and techniques secret. But the controversy about this story isn't about the anglers, but the fish themselves that they caught. The rainbows they caught were trilopods, which means they have 3 sets of chromosomes, while normal rainbow trout only have 2. And like we talked about earlier, I'm not sure too much about these chromosome things and stuff, but it's basically a genetic change that causes the trout to use all their energy just to feed and feed on everything. And the female fish is born without reproductive organs, so they don't spawn, which gives them more time to grow. And you're probably like, how did trilopod rainbows get there? And what happened, the story was there was a damaged net at this company called Can Grow Fish Farm on that lake. In spring of 2000, 500,000 of these fish escaped. And they created these fish when the females lay their eggs. It had 3 chromosomes, and when a male fish sperm enters the egg, one of the chromosomes is rejected, and this is how the rainbow typical is born. But what the fish farm would do is they would do that pressure treatment and heat shocking like we talked about, and that pressure would hold the polar body, and that heat shocking would make that 3rd chromosome remain. So that's how you came about with these fish. And the controversies is that it's a genetic modified rainbow. It's not like a wild rainbow that's only have two chromosomes. They can't reproduce, so they're constantly feeding and eating and growing bigger. And that's the thing. But really, these anglers went out there, and maybe they did have an advantage being in the situation they were. But they were amazing anglers. They went out there and they caught all these records. There were other people fishing this lake, and you don't see them bringing in world records. But these two brothers were amazing anglers that went out there and put their time in fishing. And I did see their videos online, and it was pretty amazing seeing these fish they were catching out there. And they do have one of that record being caught too, which is pretty neat. Those fish are probably all gone now, which is kind of sad. So there won't be any more records, I don't believe, from that lake, since it's been about, 25 years, since 2000. That record was caught in 2009. So that sounds about right. That fish was probably, around 9 to 10 years old when that record was caught. And it was probably at its full potential at that point, even though they might live a little longer. Those records were right around the right time. And all those trilipod rainbows are most likely dead and gone now because they didn't reproduce because they couldn't. So a little sad on that aspect. But that doesn't mean you guys can't go out there and try to catch your own personal best or even a state record. And maybe there is a situation with the right water location and breeding ground that there might be, another rainbow record, but I don't know if that will ever get beaten because that's a pretty amazing size fish. That is the controversy behind that story, and nothing to do with the anglers, but just with the fish. And they were out there, and the way I look at it, it is a record. People might want to put an asterisk on it, but that was pretty neat that they caught those many fish at that size over and over again. And I think it's neat that the one twin identical brother broke the other one's record. You don't hear about stuff like that happening too often. So that's pretty neat. That's a good story for us today. I didn't get too much into what you need basically for trout fish, and I don't want to get too much into it. If you get it out there, you just want to have some, you don't need a lot, like I said. Go out there with a few of those lures we talked about earlier, with a decent spinning setup with some, clear monofilament. Keep it around that 4 to 8 pound range. If you're going with ultralight, you can go with 2 pound. And just go out there and get some fishing and catch some of those stock fish they're throwing in right now. And we're getting right into that good weather right now, and bass spawning season's coming up upon us, and we're going to be getting some good largemouth and smallmouth fishing in. Get out there, enjoy some trout fishing, change it up, and soon there'll be some good bass fishing and some other species to catch as well. But I think this is a good time to go out there and hone on your skills. And if you haven't caught a tiger trout and they're stocked in your area, go try to catch that. If you never caught a brown trout, go out that. Try going out at a darker time and trying to catch that. Or a brook trout, try that moving water. If you caught a trout before, you probably caught in a rainbow before. But those are the 4 species that we have here in Massachusetts, and are many around the northern part of the country here that you can catch. So if you're not sure what's in your waterways, check on your local game and fish state website and see what their stocking report says, because they list it. And go out there and catch a new type of trout if you haven't. Or if you have already caught all these trouts, go out there and try to break your personal best. So good luck to you all, and get some good fishing in. Glad to have Springs here, and soon we'll have another episode. So you guys all take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.